Welcome back. I've got a special story to share today.
Your mother doesn't need that kind of money anymore. She barely remembers what day it is. My husband said that to me, in our kitchen. November 2025. While carving the turkey, I had spent 6 hours preparing for a woman he was quietly robbing. His carving knife moved in precise, even strokes. He didn't look up. He said it the way you mention a change in the weather, casually, factually, as if my mother's life savings were a line item he had already deleted. I set down the gravy boat. My hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken in 3 years. Not since the night I found the first receipt and decided that trembling was a luxury I could no longer afford. That coral-handled gravy boat. My mother gave it to me the year I got married. I still see it when I close my eyes. My name is Catherine Aldrich-Mercer. I am 44 years old. For 20 years, I was the woman who hosted the dinners, managed the household, raised 2 children, and never once questioned the man who managed my family's money. I was good at it. I could organize a fundraiser for 300 people in 6 weeks. I could manage a renovation, a school crisis, and a dinner party in the same afternoon. And for the past 3 years, I have been building a case against my husband that would make a federal prosecutor weep with envy. But what Graham didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that the woman he called sweetheart in that kitchen had 1,247 pages of evidence locked in a filing cabinet in Marblehead. And the day of reckoning was closer than the turkey he was carving. But I'll get to that. Before I tell you how that Thanksgiving dinner ended, let me take you back. Because this story didn't begin with a carving knife and a casual cruelty. It began 4 years earlier, with a coat pocket and a receipt that smelled like someone else's perfume. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever watched someone you trusted dismantle someone you love, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Because what happened in my family's dining room changed everything. And the person who brought the truth wasn't a lawyer or an investigator. It was a woman in a cable-knit sweater who learned to read spreadsheets while her husband thought she was learning soufflés. October 2021. The night everything started. I was hanging Graham's overcoat in the hall closet, the charcoal cashmere he wore every autumn, bought at Brooks Brothers, a coat that cost more than my first car. Something crinkled in the inner pocket. A receipt from a Newport jeweler. $2,800, a bracelet, engraved, for SB. My pulse quickened, but not the way you might expect. Not with jealousy, with confusion. I didn't know anyone with those initials. I told myself it was a client gift. Graham's firm managed wealth for dozens of families. A bracelet for a client's wife. A thank you for a referral. Reasonable, ordinary. I put the receipt back, closed the closet door, went to bed. But those 2 letters, S and P, kept circling in my mind like a bird that couldn't find a place to land. 2 weeks later, I found another receipt. This one tucked inside his briefcase, which he'd left open on the kitchen island, something he never did. Newport Harbor Hotel, Suite 412, 2 nights, November 14 through 16. The same weekend he told me he had a financial planning conference in Hartford. Hartford is 90 minutes west. Newport is 90 minutes south. They are not the same direction. I stood in my kitchen holding that receipt, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Awareness. The way your eyes adjust when you walk from a bright room into a dark one, and suddenly you can see shapes you couldn't see before. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it, and I said nothing. That decision, silence instead of confrontation, saved everything that came after. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't she confront him? Because I knew exactly how it would go. I would have said, Graham, I found a receipt for a bracelet. Who is SB? And he would have tilted his head, smiled that warm, patient smile, and said, sweetheart, it's a client gift. Sandra Patterson, she referred 3 families last quarter. I told you about this. And if I pressed, Catherine, I manage money for a living. Do you really think I would leave a receipt in my coat if I were hiding something? And then the touch on my shoulder, the sigh, the quiet recalibration. You've been stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone. That is how men like Graham win. They don't deny, they diagnose. So I did what the women in my family never did. I said nothing. I started looking. And what I found was worse than any affair. My mother, Eleanor Aldrich, was 74 that year. She lived alone in the Beacon Hill brownstone my father bought in 1972, the year he was appointed to the federal bench. 4 stories of brick and history with a garden where she grew peonies and talked to them like old friends. She was still sharp then, still hosting book club on Tuesdays, still calling me every Sunday at exactly 7:00 in the evening. "Catherine, what are the children reading?" "Lily finished Charlotte's Web, Mom." "Good, did she cry at the end?" "Buckets." "Then she understands that's what matters." That was my mother. She measured a child's character by whether they cried for a spider. My father died in 2018. He left behind a trust, $3.2 million managed by Graham's firm. "Keep it in the family," Dad had said. Those 5 words became the key to every lock Graham would pick. I requested a copy of Mom's annual trust statement that January. I had received these before and never truly read them. But that January, I sat at my kitchen table at 10:00 on a Tuesday morning, put on my reading glasses, and read every line. Advisory fees, $48,000. I called 3 wealth management firms in Boston. The first one laughed. "For a trust that size, you should be paying between $24,000 and $40,000. Whoever is charging $48,000 is either lazy or greedy." The second said the same. The third was more diplomatic. "It's on the high end of acceptable, Mrs. Mercer." "And what about a fee called loss recovery?" Silence. "Mrs. Mercer, that is not a standard industry term." "Is it a real fee?" "I have been in wealth management for 22 years. I have never heard of it." Graham was charging 1.5% and inventing fees that did not exist. My coffee went cold. I didn't notice. I didn't have a finance degree. I had a degree in English literature from Wellesley and 20 years of experience managing a household budget, 2 children's school schedules, and a husband who believed those skills were charming but fundamentally unimportant. But I knew how to read, and I knew when numbers told conflicting stories. My mother's trust had dropped by $190,000 in a single year. Graham's explanation, buried in footnotes, market volatility and strategic repositioning. I looked up the S&P 500 return for that year. It was up 18%. My mother lost money in a year when almost everything gained. The numbers didn't lie, but Graham did, every single quarter. Here is a small example of how good he was at keeping me in the dark. 2 months before I found the trust statement, Graham came home early on a Friday, rare for him. He was carrying a bottle of wine and a bag from my favorite bakery on Charles Street. He set them on the counter, kissed my forehead, and said, "I had a good quarter. Let me spoil you." We sat on the porch that evening while the children slept upstairs. He talked about retirement, about traveling to Italy, about growing old together in the garden. He held my hand under the blanket and said I was the best thing that ever happened to him. He meant none of it. That same week, according to Ruth's later timeline, he had transferred $31,000 from my mother's trust to Beacon Harbor LLC. The wine he brought me that Friday evening cost $42. The money he stole that same week cost my mother a full year of living expenses. That is the mathematics of betrayal, the distance between a $42 bottle of Cabernet and a $31,000 wire transfer, measured in trust and silence, and a woman who didn't yet know she was being dismantled from the inside out. I kept that wine bottle. It sits on a shelf in my office now, empty, with the receipt taped to its side. Evidence. Everything in my life had become evidence. That was the night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to him, listening to him breathe, steady, unbothered, the sleep of a man who believed he was untouchable. I thought about my mother alone in that brownstone, trusting the man her daughter married to protect her future. I thought about my father, Judge Walter Aldrich, who spent 30 years on the bench because he believed in accountability. I thought about the green leather address book Mom kept by the phone, the one with every person she had ever loved written in fountain pen. Graham's name was in that book. Page 47, blue ink, She added it the week of our wedding in her careful slanting script. She called him son. She made him pot roast every Sunday he visited. She knitted him a scarf his first winter because he mentioned once that his neck got cold on the commute. And he was stealing from her, dollar by dollar, fee by fabricated fee, while she salted his food and warmed his hands and trusted him with the only security her dead husband had left her. I wouldn't learn the full scope of Graham's crime until Ruth Kavanaugh called me on a Wednesday afternoon in March 2022. And when she told me what she had been quietly documenting for 6 months on her own, I realized the man sleeping beside me wasn't just unfaithful. He was something far worse, but I'll get to that. First, you need to understand what Ruth was doing in silence entirely on her own before she picked up the phone and changed everything. Ruth Kavanaugh was 76 that year, retired from probate law for 4 years and sharper than most attorneys still practicing. She had known my mother for 52 years. They met at a league fundraiser in 1970, both wearing the wrong shoes and both pretending they hadn't noticed. When Eleanor mentioned casually over tea that Graham says the market has been rough, he says I might need to tighten things up. Something shifted behind Ruth's eyes. Eleanor Aldrich had never been told to tighten anything. Walter's trust was designed specifically to prevent that sentence from ever being spoken. Ruth started intercepting Eleanor's mail. Not stealing. Eleanor had given her power of attorney in 1998, long before Graham entered the picture. She simply arrived at the brownstone early on the 1st of each month, before Graham's assistant could redirect the statements. She collected 6 months of trust records, cross-referenced them with public market data, and built a timeline in a green leather portfolio. She bought it at the same stationery shop on Charles Street, where Eleanor bought her address book, same shade of green, same brass clasp. Ruth believed that evidence should be carried with the same care as love. When she called me that Wednesday afternoon, her voice was the one I recognized from her courtroom days, measured, deliberate, each word weighed before release. "Catherine, I need you to come to my house. Bring nothing. Tell no one, especially not Graham." I drove to Brookline that afternoon. A modest colonial with blue shutters and a garden that looked like it had opinions about everything. Ruth spread the statements across her dining table, current records and archived statements she had requested going back 18 months through Eleanor's POA. The late afternoon light caught the column headings. "Look at the withdrawals, Catherine. January, $14,000. February, $22,000. March, $31,000. April, $18,500. Every one coded as an advisory fee or investment adjustment. Every one bearing Graham's signature." She paused, letting the numbers settle. "Your mother's trust has lost $412,000 in 18 months, in a market that gained 23%. I stared at the columns until my vision blurred. "Ruth, tell me I'm reading this wrong. You're reading it correctly." She closed the folder and opened it again, as if the numbers might change. They didn't. "Tell me there's an explanation." "There is an explanation. Your husband is stealing from your mother, systematically, professionally, and if we don't stop him, there won't be anything left." I sat with those words. The dining room clock ticked. Ruth poured water from a pitcher. Her hands were perfectly steady. "How long have you known?" 6 months. I wanted to be certain before I came to you. I wanted documentation that would hold up in any court in Massachusetts. 6 months. "Ruth, why didn't you?" "Because I needed you to see the numbers yourself. Not secondhand, not summarized. You needed to hold this paper and feel what it means." But what Ruth said next stopped me cold. "There's something else. I found a corporate filing, Beacon Harbor LLC, registered in Rhode Island. Aldrich-Mercer is the sole member." She placed the LLC registration on the table. "This company purchased a waterfront property in Newport 14 months ago for $680,000. Funds traced to 3 wire transfers from your mother's trust." She pulled out a property listing. A saltbox cottage on Ocean Drive. White clapboard, blue door, hydrangeas in the window boxes. "Property tax records list a second resident." Ruth's voice dropped. "A woman named Sloane Prescott." The bracelet, SB. The initials I couldn't place. Now they had a name, a face, a house, all built on the bones of my mother's trust, on the money my father set aside so she could grow old without fear. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the highway and the weight of what I now knew. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Marblehead, I had made 3 decisions. 1, I would not confront Graham. 2, I would get certified in forensic accounting, a credential that would transform me from a suspicious wife into a credible witness. 3, I would build a case so airtight that when it opened, no one on earth could call me paranoid or dramatic or emotional. I enrolled in the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners program the following Monday. Graham thought I was taking online cooking classes. I let him believe it. I even baked him a soufflé once, collapsed in the middle, deliberately imperfect, so the cover story would hold. For the next 2 years, while Graham ate the dinners I cooked and kissed my forehead and drove to Newport on weekends he called client retreats, I studied fraud detection, forensic document analysis, the psychology of financial predators. I studied at the kitchen table after the children went asleep. I studied in the car while waiting at soccer practice. I studied in the bathroom at 6:00 in the morning with the door locked and the shower running so Graham would think I was getting ready. Every chapter I read gave me new language for what he was doing: fabrication of fees, phantom loss reporting, shell company asset diversion. I learned the terminology the way a surgeon learns anatomy, precisely, clinically, without sentiment. And I built a file that would eventually reach 1,247 pages. Graham never noticed. His fatal flaw wasn't sloppiness. It was the absolute certainty that the woman making his breakfast could never be the one reading his spreadsheets. Here is the thing about becoming invisible in your own marriage. People stop guarding themselves around you. Graham left his laptop open on Sunday mornings while he showered. He took phone calls in the living room while I sat 10 feet away folding laundry. One Sunday I heard him say, "The harbor project needs another adjustment. Pull 22 from the advisory reserve." Then a pause. "No, she won't notice. Eleanor doesn't read statements anymore." Another pause. "Tell us B the contractor starts Monday. The kitchen island was her idea. Get the marble she picked out." I folded a shirt, then another. I said nothing. My face showed nothing. That night I entered every word into a spreadsheet. Date, time, exact quote, likely meaning. The harbor project meant another withdrawal from the trust. SB meant Sloane Prescott. The marble kitchen island in Newport was being funded by my mother's retirement savings. Graham spoke about Eleanor's money the way you speak about furniture, something functional, belonging to whoever was using it. He never once looked at me during those calls. He never considered that the woman folding his shirts was building a federal case, one overheard conversation at a time. Everything he said became a column in my spreadsheet. Everything he whispered became evidence. In August 2023, Henry Zhao became my mentor. He was 36, former IRS, now an investigator with the Elder Abuse Task Force. The kind of man who could read a balance sheet the way a cardiologist reads an EKG and find the irregular heartbeat in the numbers. I had submitted my certification application and flagged the Aldrich Trust as a potential case study. Henry called me within a week. "Mrs. Mercer, the patterns you've identified are textbook elder financial exploitation. But I need to ask you directly, this is your husband. Are you certain you want to proceed?" I didn't hesitate, not for a second. My mother called him son and made him Sunday dinners for 6 years. He used her trust to buy a beach house for another woman, I am certain. Henry went quiet for a long time. I could hear him writing something down. Then, "How long have you been documenting?" 18 months. "Who else knows? Ruth Kavanaugh, she has the trust statements, and my sister suspects something but doesn't have details." Another pause. "Mrs. Mercer, your instincts are better than most agents I've trained. Most people in your situation call a divorce lawyer. You built an evidence file. Let's build this case together." Over the next 18 months, I documented everything. I cross-referenced Graham's travel calendar with Sloane Prescott's public Instagram posts, 6 overlapping weekends in Newport, complete with geolocation data and embedded timestamps. A sunset cocktail photo on a porch I recognized from the property listing. A selfie with blue hydrangeas matching the exterior. Sloane's posts told a love story she believed was real. She tagged Graham as my favorite person on his birthday and posted a photo of them in matching Adirondack chairs with the caption, "Home is wherever you are." Graham had told her the Newport house was inherited from his late wife's family. So Sloane posted freely, proudly, believing she was sharing a home with a man who had lost everything and was rebuilding. She didn't know that home was purchased with a 78-year-old woman's retirement fund. She believed Graham was a widower. He had told her I was dead. I discovered this detail when Henry pulled the Newport rental application. Graham listed his marital status as widowed. The irony nearly broke me. Not the affair. Not even the money. The fact that Graham had erased me so completely that another woman mourned a version of me that never existed. I sat in my home office in Marblehead that night, the evidence file glowing on the screen, and I cried for the first and last time during those 3 years. Not because I was hurt. Because the woman Graham described to Sloane, the kind, devoted wife who died tragically, was closer to who I actually was than anyone in my family seemed to know. Then I dried my face, opened a new spreadsheet column, and kept working. There would be time for grief later. Right now there was arithmetic, and the arithmetic was devastating. Henry taught me something during that time that I carry with me still. The best investigators, he said one afternoon over coffee at a diner in Quincy, are the ones who can hold rage and patience in the same hand. Rage tells you something is wrong. Patience tells you how to prove it. I wrote those words in the front of my evidence binder. I held both emotions for 3 years while Graham carved turkey next to me at holidays, while he whispered, "Sweetheart," in the dark, while he signed my mother's name on documents she could no longer fully understand. And I never once let my aim waver. If I had known what Graham was about to do to my mother's remaining savings, the final, desperate withdrawal that would drain her trust below the threshold for basic care, I would have moved faster. But desperation makes predators sloppy, and sloppy predators leave trails that even the most careful fabrication cannot erase. Life was about to force the truth out in the most public way imaginable, at a table set with my mother's wedding china, under a chandelier that had witnessed 44 years of family history. And it started with a phone call from my sister Maggie at 6:00 on a Tuesday morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving 2025. Maggie's voice was tight, not her surgeon voice. That one was clinical mechanical, designed for delivering diagnoses to frightened families in hospital corridors at 3:00 in the morning. This was her little sister voice, the one that surfaced when she was genuinely scared. "Kate, Mom's bank called me. They said her checking account is overdrawn. Overdrawn, Kate, Mom." My blood went cold. The trust was supposed to replenish that account automatically. That's not possible. She has the trust. I know. I called Graham. He said there's been a market correction and he's restructuring. He told me not to worry. Not to worry. The exact phrase he had used for 6 years while he carved my mother's security apart. I gripped the phone hard enough to feel my knuckles ache. "Maggie," I said carefully, "listen to me. Don't call Graham again. Don't mention this conversation. Not to Mom, not to anyone. I need you to trust me." A long silence. "Kate, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I owed her the truth, but not yet, not on the phone, not when the case was 3 days from completion and the evidence needed to land all at once. "Come for Thanksgiving. Come early Wednesday night. Bring an overnight bag. I'll explain everything then." She agreed. Maggie had spent her career trusting specialists, anesthesiologists, radiologists, nurses who knew things she didn't. She was trusting me now the same way. That afternoon, I called Henry Zhao. "Henry, the trust is nearly empty. He's making a final withdrawal. I need the Beacon Harbor LLC analysis finished by Thursday." Henry was quiet. "How much is left in the trust?" I checked 2 spreadsheets and cross-referenced the latest intercepted statement. approximately $180,000, and total misappropriation, $1.4 million over 6 years. He exhaled slowly. Catherine, do not confront him. Let us handle this through proper channels. We can have a warrant by mid-December. By mid-December, the trust will be empty. I understand the urgency, but a civilian confrontation could compromise. Henry, my mother has $180,000 left. That is 4 months of care. I am not waiting for a warrant while he drains the last of it. He was silent for a long time. If you do this, I can't have agents present. It has to be your decision, not ours. Understood, but if I call you during dinner, can your team respond? Another pause. We can be in Beacon Hill in 30 minutes. I hung up and opened my filing cabinet. The banker's box sat on the bottom shelf, brown cardboard, unremarkable, invisible to anyone who didn't know what it held. Inside, 1,247 pages, every receipt. Every fabricated fee, every phantom loss, every wire transfer to Beacon Harbor LLC, Instagram screenshots, geolocation data, the Newport rental application listing Graham as widowed, and the property deed signed with my mother's money. I placed the box on my desk and wrote one word on the lid in black marker. Eleanor. The day before Thanksgiving, Ruth arrived at my house in Marblehead at 9:00 in the morning. She carried the green portfolio and a thermos of Earl Grey. We went through the presentation one final time, 47 minutes, every document in order, every number verified twice. When we finished, Ruth stirred her tea without drinking it. She looked at me across the kitchen table, the same table where I had first opened Mom's trust statements 4 years ago. You understand that once you do this, your marriage is over. My marriage ended the night I found the bracelet receipt. I just didn't know it yet. And your mother, she may not fully comprehend what we're telling her. I know, my voice cracked, the first crack in 3 years, but she deserves to know that someone fought for her, even if she can't remember it tomorrow. Ruth placed her hand over mine. Walter Aldrich did not raise a woman who looks away. He also didn't raise a woman who makes speeches at Thanksgiving dinner with federal evidence, so we're in uncharted territory. Ruth almost laughed. Catherine, your father would have loved this. He would have pulled a chair up and taken notes. She squeezed my hand. We're ready. Everything is in order. Tomorrow we tell the truth. That evening, Maggie arrived. She walked through my front door with dark circles under her eyes and a duffel bag she'd packed in 90 seconds flat. She was still wearing her hospital badge clipped to her jacket. She hadn't even gone home to change. Okay, she said, dropping the bag on the kitchen floor with the decisive thud of a woman who had spent her career making fast decisions in high-pressure rooms. Tell me everything. So I told her. Every receipt, every fabricated fee. Sloane Prescott. The blue door, the hydrangeas, the widowed checkbox on the rental application. It took 2 hours and most of a bottle of wine. When I finished, Maggie was sitting on my kitchen floor with her back against the refrigerator, staring at the ceiling. $1.4 million, she whispered, from Mom's trust, while she knitted him scarves and made him pot roast every Sunday. Yes, and you've been studying forensic accounting for 2 years while he thought you were learning to cook. Yes. She looked at me, and something shifted in her face. The guilt she had been carrying for years about not visiting Mom enough, about not paying closer attention, about letting Graham handle everything because it was easier than asking questions. How did you not kill him? Focus, Maggie. Murder has a lower conviction rate than financial fraud, and the paperwork is significantly less satisfying. She almost smiled. Almost. Then her surgeon's jaw set. What do you need me to do tomorrow? If you're still listening, hit subscribe right now, because what happened at that Thanksgiving table is the part even I didn't expect. Thanksgiving morning, Beacon Hill. My mother's brownstone smelled like roasted sage and the lemon polish she had used on the dining table since 1974. That table, 12-seat mahogany, bought by my father at an estate sale the year I was born. He carried it up the front steps with 2 friends and considerable profanity. Mom fed them pot roast afterward. 44 Thanksgivings at this table. Every birthday. Every report card celebration. Every awkward Sunday dinner when relatives brought unwelcome opinions. The Wood knew us. It held our voices in its grain. Mom was in the kitchen at 7:00, wearing the embroidered apron Maggie bought her a decade ago. She moved more slowly now. Her hands trembled measuring the broth. She forgot she'd already salted the stuffing and salted it twice. But her smile was the same, wide, genuine, the smile of a woman who believed feeding people was the purest expression of love. Graham arrived at noon in the charcoal cashmere coat, same pocket where I found the first receipt 4 years ago. He carried 2 bottles of expensive wine and white roses for my mother. "Eleanor," he said, kissing her cheek. "You look wonderful." She beamed. "Graham, darling, you spoil me. The market was good to us this quarter. I wanted to celebrate." The market, us, as if stealing from her and profiting from it were a partnership. He turned to me. "Catherine, the table looks beautiful." "Is that the Wedgwood?" "Mom's wedding china, 1971. Extraordinary set, worth quite a lot now, I'd imagine." Even here, even at Thanksgiving, he appraised everything. I smiled. "Priceless, I would say." He kissed my forehead. "You're too sentimental, sweetheart." The fury was so deep it felt like silence. The guests arrived. Graham's business partner, Stephen Hale, and his wife, Dorothy. My cousin Andrew and his wife. Mom's neighbor, Dr. Patricia Russo, who'd known our family for 30 years and brought the same reliably terrible pumpkin bread that everyone complimented and nobody finished. Then Ruth Kavanaugh, carrying the green portfolio in a canvas tote beside her chair. Graham noticed Ruth and stiffened for 1 second, one fraction of a second where his charm flickered like a light on a bad circuit. He recovered with a smile. "Ruth, what a pleasure." Ruth looked at him with the calm, unblinking patience of a retired attorney who had been waiting for this dinner for 3 years. "Graham, the pleasure is entirely mine." Dinner proceeded with the careful choreography of family performance. Graham sat at the head of the table, a position my father held for 40 years, and Graham assumed the year after Dad died without asking. He simply sat down and nobody questioned it. That is how men like Graham acquire power. They don't request it. They occupy it. Mom sat at the opposite end, confused whether she'd served the cranberry sauce or only imagined it. Graham poured wine and held court. "Stephen, the Hargrove portfolio is up 14% this quarter. That rebalancing strategy we discussed is paying off." Stephen nodded approvingly. "And Eleanor's trust? Stable, conservative positioning. She's in excellent hands." He said this while sitting 6 seats from the woman whose trust he had gutted by $1.4 million. I waited. Ruth waited. Maggie's hands were in her lap, knuckles white against her linen napkin. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Then Mom set down her fork. Nobody planned what happened next. Not me, not Ruth, not Maggie. My mother turned to Graham with the quiet authority of a woman who had chaired fundraisers and balanced a household budget for 50 years. "Graham, dear, I received a letter from the bank last week. They said my account is low, but you told me the investments were doing well." Graham's smile didn't fall. It froze. "Eleanor, we discussed this. Market adjustment. Everything is being restructured." "But the letter said overdrawn, Graham. Overdrawn. That doesn't sound like restructured. You don't need to worry about the details, Eleanor. I managed this household's finances for 32 years before you arrived, young man. I know what overdrawn means." I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. In the shower. In the car. At 3:00 in the morning staring at the ceiling. I had imagined standing up, laying the documents on the table, watching Graham's face collapse. But I never imagined my mother would be the one to light the match. She hadn't needed me to start this. She had challenged Graham with the same quiet authority she used to challenge contractors, school principals, and the occasional plumber who tried to overcharge her. Her mind was perfectly clear, not fog, not forgetting, but the full, devastating precision of a woman who had balanced books and raised daughters with exacting standards. Graham's jaw worked silently. He had no answer that wouldn't crack the performance wide open, and every face at that table was watching him search for one. I set down my fork. "Actually, Mom, I think we should talk about the details." Graham's head turned toward me. "Catherine." His voice was soft, controlled, deploying my full name the way he always did when he wanted to sound patient. "This isn't the time. This is exactly the time." I turned to Ruth. She placed the green portfolio on the table. The sound of leather on mahogany silenced every voice in the room. Ruth opened the clasp and placed the first statement beside the cranberry sauce. Eleanor, I need to show you something. Your trust statement, January 2023. Advisory fees, $48,000. Industry standard for your trust is $24,000 to $40,000. Graham charged you double. Second statement, February 2023. A withdrawal coded as loss recovery fee, $22,000. Eleanor, there is no such fee in wealth management. I contacted 3 firms and FINRA. This fee does not exist. Graham invented it. Graham stood. His chair scraped the hardwood. This is absurd. Ruth, you have no authority. Eleanor gave me power of attorney in 1998 when Walter was alive. He insisted. 27 years of unbroken legal authority. Those documents are fabricated. Graham's voice rose for the first time. I don't know where you got these statements, but they have clearly been altered. This is defamation. Ruth said nothing. She placed the LLC registration for Beacon Harbor on the table. This shell company was filed in Rhode Island. Sole member, Aldrich-Mercer. It purchased a waterfront property in Newport for $680,000. Funds traced to 3 wire transfers from Eleanor's trust. You're taking this completely out of context. Graham turned to the room, palms open, performing reason. This is an investment property, held in trust structure. Eleanor, you signed the authorization. I did not, my mother said, clear, firm, every head turned. I never signed anything for a property in Newport. I have never been to Newport, Graham. Graham's jaw tightened. He pivoted. Catherine, this is your doing. His voice dropped, intimate, as if we were alone. You've always been like this. Since the day we married, you've been looking for something to be wrong. Your sister knows it. Your mother knows it. You see betrayal in everything because you can't accept that someone might actually be good at managing money. I had waited 4 years for those words, the attack on my credibility, the gaslighting deployed at the Thanksgiving table in front of 13 witnesses. I let the silence hold for 5 seconds. Then I opened my file. You're right about one thing, Graham. I have been looking. I placed the first printout on the table. 6 overlapping weekends in Newport cross-referenced with Sloane Prescott's Instagram geolocation data. A sunset cocktail on the porch of the property your LLC purchased. A selfie with blue hydrangeas matching the exterior. I placed the rental application beside it. The Newport rental application. Your marital status in your handwriting. Widowed. Stephen Hale's wineglass hit the table. Widowed? He told Sloane Prescott I was dead, I said. It's on the application. Stephen stood up. His chair fell backward. Graham, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you did not use firm infrastructure to run a shell company through an elderly woman's trust. Graham opened his mouth. Nothing came. Graham! Stephen's voice was steel, the 30-year partnership cracking in real time. I asked you a direct question. Did you fabricate fees through our firm? Silence. Did you create Beacon Harbor LLC using our systems? More silence. Stephen placed both hands flat on the table. Then I'm calling our compliance officer tonight, and I'm calling a lawyer who isn't you. Graham staggered. His eyes darted between faces, Stephen's fury, Dorothy's shock, Dr. Russell holding my mother's arm, Andrew standing now, blocking the hallway. Then Graham did something I didn't expect. He laughed, a short, broken sound. You have no idea what it was like. His voice cracked. You think I wanted this? I grew up in Dorchester. My father was a plumber who drank every night. My mother cleaned office buildings for $47 a day. I married into this family and spent 20 years terrified that someone would see the kid from Ave behind the suit. His eyes found Mom's. Everything I took, Eleanor, I took because I was trying to become someone worthy of sitting at this table. He stopped. The room heard it. We all heard it. Everything I took, not invested, not managed, took. The self-incrimination slipped out dressed as a confession, and there was no taking it back. Maggie leaned forward, her eyes on the summary page I had placed in front of her that morning. The surgeon's voice, precise, clinical, devastating. Total misappropriation over 6 years, $1.4 million. Advisory fees $340,000 above standard. Phantom losses of $680,000. Shell company transfers of $380,000. And you just told a table of 13 people that you took it. Graham, every single dollar. Mom looked past the documents, past the property listing, past Ruth's portfolio. She looked at the charcoal cashmere overcoat on the back of Graham's chair. I bought him that coat. 5 words, soft. The room stopped breathing. She was looking at the coat she gave him for Christmas 6 years ago, the year the first fabricated fee appeared. At Brooks Brothers, December 2019, because he told me the heat in his office was broken and he was cold. Her eyes moved to Graham. You were cold, Graham, and I wanted to keep you warm. Tears ran down her face, but her voice held steady. I called you son. I made you pot roast every Sunday. I knitted you a scarf because you said your neck was cold. She touched her green address book beside her plate. Page 47, blue ink, the week of the wedding. The boy from Dorchester stood exposed, every stolen dollar stripped away by a woman with dementia and a fountain pen. Ruth closed the portfolio. The brass clasp clicked shut. I've filed a formal complaint with the Elder Financial Abuse Task Force. An investigator named Henry Zhao has the complete file. Every page, every receipt. Federal authorities have been briefed. She looked at Graham with the steady gaze of a woman who had spent 47 years in courtrooms watching men crumble. I've been a lawyer for nearly half a century. I've seen men steal land, businesses, inheritances. But I have never seen a man steal from the woman who called him son, and then sit at her table eating the roast she made him. Graham looked at me one last time. Catherine, sweetheart, please. Don't call me sweetheart. You used that word like a leash for 20 years, you're done. He reached for the charcoal cashmere coat and walked toward the front door. He opened it. 2 men stood on the brick steps, dark suits, federal badges. They had arrived 7 minutes ago. Ruth had texted Henry from under the table the moment I opened the green portfolio, and his team made Beacon Hill in 28 minutes. Mr. Mercer. Agent DeLuca, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We have questions regarding Beacon Harbor LLC and the Aldrich Family Trust. Graham turned back toward the dining room. 13 faces watching from the hallway. His partner, his mother-in-law, the woman with the green portfolio, and behind him, 2 agents who had been called by a retired attorney who still knew how to build a case. He went quietly. Men like Graham always go quietly once every lie has been accounted for and there is nothing left to perform. The door closed behind him. The brownstones settled into a silence so deep I could hear the candle flames bending in their holders and the grandfather clock marking seconds that suddenly felt slower, heavier, as if time itself needed a moment to absorb what had happened. Mom spoke first. Where did Graham go? He didn't finish his dinner. Maggie crumbled. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, the first tears from her since childhood. I knelt beside my mother's chair and took both her hands. Her skin was thin, cool, like paper handled too gently for too long. Mom, Graham made very bad choices. He won't be coming back for dinner. Her eyes cleared completely, not fog, not forgetting, but full, devastating understanding. The kind of clarity that arrives like a searchlight cutting through harbor mist. He stole from me. Yes, Mom. And you caught him. Yes. She squeezed my hands. Her grip was stronger than I expected, the grip of a woman who had chaired fundraisers, balanced household budgets, raised 2 daughters with exacting standards, and survived a marriage that lasted longer than most careers. Good girl, she whispered. Your father always said you were the brave one. Ruth poured 3 glasses of the wine Graham had brought, the expensive wine, bought with stolen money. She set one in front of Mom, one in front of Maggie, and one in front of me. Maggie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and lifted her glass. Mom's hand trembled, but she raised hers too. We didn't clink them. We simply drank together, 3 women at a mahogany table that had held 44 years of family dinners and was now holding its first act of justice. The wine was very good. It was the last thing Graham Mercer ever gave this family, and we made sure it was worth every stolen penny. If you've ever watched someone you love be exploited by someone they trusted, type 1 word in the comments. Because the part after the arrest, the part most people never hear, is where healing actually begins. And it doesn't look like a Hollywood ending. It looks like arithmetic and address books and Sunday phone calls at 7:00 in the evening. Graham's assets were frozen by December. The Newport property was seized in January. Sloane Prescott, upon learning her widower boyfriend was married, employed, and under federal investigation, posted one Instagram story, a photo of the blue front door with the caption, "Not all that glitters." 642 likes. The trust was partially restored through asset recovery, $820,000 of the $1.4 million, with the remainder pending civil litigation. Stephen Hale dissolved the partnership by February. Graham's name came off the door. The Patek Philippe watch was seized as part of the asset recovery. Mom didn't understand all of it. Some days she asked where Graham was. Some days she didn't remember his name at all, which was its own kind of mercy. But every Sunday at 7:00 she called me. And every Sunday she said the same words in the same careful voice, as if she were reading them from the front page of her address book. "Catherine, I don't remember everything, but I remember you sat at that table and you didn't let him take what was mine." I held the phone and let her say it every time, because some truths are worth repeating even when the person speaking them cannot remember saying them before. In January, she opened her green address book, turned to page 47. Graham's name in blue ink from the week of the wedding. She studied it for a long moment, the careful, slanting script she had written 20 years ago when she believed she was welcoming a son into the family. Then she picked up a pen from the table, the black one she used for crossword puzzles, and crossed Graham's name out with a single precise line. She turned to the front page and wrote, in that same careful hand, "Catherine." The brave one. She placed the book by the phone, and she never said Graham's name again. Maggie comes to Marblehead every other weekend now. She brings North End takeout and terrible jokes she collects from her residents all week. Ruth drives up for holidays. They sit at my kitchen table and argue about the Red Sox while Mom corrects their grammar and Maggie pretends to be offended. I still work for the task force part-time now. Henry Zhao calls me his best civilian consultant, which I suspect is code for most persistent. Last month, I testified in a case involving a retired teacher whose nephew embezzled her pension through a fabricated investment scheme. His lawyer called me just a housewife. The judge reviewed my credentials, then looked at the lawyer over his reading glasses. "Counselor, this housewife has a higher conviction rate than most of the attorneys in this courtroom." I wear the cable knit sweater to every hearing. It is my armor. It is my disguise. It is the costume of a woman who people underestimate until the evidence starts talking. I don't mind being underestimated. In fact, I prefer it, because the most dangerous person in any room is never the one making noise. It is the one sitting quietly with a pen, a spreadsheet, and the patience to wait until the numbers speak for themselves. Some families are built around silver and crystal and the performance of respectability. Some families are built around green leather address books, Sunday phone calls, and a daughter who kept the receipts. My mother may not remember what she had for breakfast, but she remembers which page I'm on in her book. She remembers that when a man in a charcoal coat sat at her table and stole her future, her eldest daughter set down the gravy boat, picked up a pen, and wrote every number down until the truth was louder than the lie. That is the glass beneath the silver. Fragile, transparent, and when it breaks, everyone sees everything. Some people call that destruction. I call it clarity, and I would do it all again.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.